The service in Salem had begun like any other, soft morning light crossing the stained glass windows, the choir lifting a familiar hymn, and the quiet murmur of families settling into wooden pews. Nothing in that room suggested that a single moment was about to bend the atmosphere into something no one could fully explain. Evan Miller, 6 years old, stood between his parents, singing with the gentle, fragile sincerity only a child can carry. His voice rose, then steadied, and then, without warning, it stopped, not hesitated, stopped. His mother felt his hand loosen. His father noticed the way Evan's shoulders lifted, as if the air had thickened around him. And then, slowly, the boy looked up toward the altar. Not at the pastor, not at the light, but through it, past it, into something no adult in that room could see. The choir kept singing, but the sound seemed to drift away from Evan, as though the hymn itself were stepping back to make space for something else. A stillness formed around him, so delicate and so heavy that people 3 pews behind felt the need to lower their voices. And then it happened. The sunlight that had been shifting with the clouds suddenly aligned in a narrow beam, straight onto Evan's face. It did not touch the pews beside him. It did not widen or fade. It simply held him, as if recognizing him. Evan's lips trembled, his eyes softened in a way that did not belong to a child trying to understand something, but to a child who already knew. His mother whispered his name. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe for a moment. He only whispered, in a tone too steady for his small frame. He was standing in the light, and he told me the time is almost gone. A murmur spread through the sanctuary. A woman covered her mouth. Someone else stood instinctively, unsure why. The pastor froze mid-sentence. Even the choir's final chord hung unfinished, suspended in the air like it too was listening. Evan lowered his gaze, chest rising with a shaky breath. He looked at his parents, not afraid, not confused, just carrying something heavy, something urgent, something he never asked to hold. And in that moment, everyone felt it. Something had entered the room. Something had asked to be heard. What would you have felt if a child said those words beside you? Would your heart have recognized the truth, or would you have turned your eyes away? The sanctuary of Salem Community Church had never felt so fragile. Even after the hymn faded and people shifted in their seats, there was a tension in the air, something quiet, something waiting. It clung to the wooden beams overhead and settled softly along the edges of every pew, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Evan Miller remained still, his small shoulders rising gently with each careful breath. His mother leaned toward him, brushing a hand over his hair the way she always did when he woke from a bad dream. But this wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was something else. Something she couldn't name, though her heart recognized it instinctively. His father watched him closely, trying to steady himself. He was a man who believed in faith, yes, but also in reason, rhythms, explanations, the kind that fit neatly inside a Sunday conversation. Yet as he looked at his son, glowing faintly in that beam of light that hadn't moved in minutes, he felt the unsettling realization that nothing about that moment belonged to reason. The pastor attempted to continue the service. He opened his Bible, cleared his throat, and read a single verse before pausing again. His voice quivered, not from doubt, but from the unspoken understanding that something sacred had brushed against the room, something that refused to be overshadowed by routine. Evan sat down slowly, still staring at his hands as though they carried warmth no one else could feel. His fingers trembled with the memory of something not fully understood, but deeply felt. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence around him was louder than words. A woman in the front row turned to look at him, her eyes glossy with emotion. She didn't know the boy. She had never spoken to his family, but something in his stillness, something in the softness of his expression, made her chest tighten. She whispered a prayer without even noticing her lips moving. The clouds outside thickened, causing the stained glass colors to deepen. Yet the single beam of light remained steady, resting solely on the small space where Evan sat. Nobody mentioned it out loud, but several hands clutched pew edges tighter, subtly bracing themselves against the heaviness settling across the room. Evan finally lifted his gaze. His voice, when it came, was quiet but steady, like warm breath on cool air. "He said the time is almost gone." The words echoed again, heavier now, carrying the weight of repetition. He didn't shout them. He didn't dramatize them. He simply let them fall into the room the way truth falls, gently but with impossible precision. His mother's eyes filled instantly. His father swallowed hard. The pastor lowered his head, fingers pressing into the wood of the pulpit. No one knew what time he meant. No one dared speculate, but everyone felt the significance in their own way, each heart interpreting, each soul adjusting its posture, as though a quiet invitation had been whispered to them directly. The choir director took a step forward, then paused. A soft shiver ran through her arms, raising goosebumps despite the warmth of the room. It wasn't fear. It wasn't discomfort. It was the awareness of presence, the kind that humbles before it speaks. And through all of this, Evan didn't look frightened. He didn't cling to his parents or hide his face. Instead, he held a calmness that didn't belong to a 6-year-old. A calmness borrowed from something beyond his small world, something that touched him only long enough to leave an imprint. He exhaled slowly, as though releasing a truth too vast for his tiny chest. Outside, the wind moved softly through the bare branches. Inside, the congregation waited, unsure of what they were waiting for, but certain that the moment wasn't finished. Not yet, not even close. The service moved forward, but it never really recovered. The pastor closed his Bible sooner than usual. The sermon shrank into a few trembling sentences about listening, about hearts that grow dull when they get used to holy things. He spoke softer than normal, as if he was sharing a secret rather than preaching to a crowd. Or maybe he simply knew the real sermon had already been spoken, through a child's voice, not his. When the final prayer ended, no one rushed for the doors. People stood slowly, almost reluctantly, as though leaving too quickly might break whatever fragile presence still hovered over the room. The regular hum of post-service chatter returned, but quieter, softer. Words felt out of place. Evan remained seated. His legs dangled above the floor, shoes not quite reaching the worn wood beneath. He traced a tiny circle on the pew with his fingertip, following the grain as though it were a path. His mother watched him in silence, resisting the urge to bombard him with questions. His father placed one hand on the back of the bench, knuckles pale, the other resting gently on Evan's shoulder. "Buddy," his father finally whispered, "are you okay?" Evan nodded, not quick and careless, slow, intentional. "I'm not scared," he said quietly. He wasn't scary. The word "he" settled like a stone in his parents' chests. A woman approached, mid-40s, eyes red, hands twisting nervously in front of her. She hesitated before speaking, glancing at the parents in silent request. Evan's mother gave a small, shaky nod. "Hi, sweetheart," the woman said gently. "My name is Claire. Her voice broke. She swallowed and started again. "When you said the time is almost gone, did he say who that was for?" Evan looked up at her. His eyes were not dramatic or distant. They were simply clear, unguarded, the way a child's eyes are when they have nothing to prove. "It was for you," he answered, as if it were obvious. "But he said you don't have to be afraid." Claire's face crumpled. A sob escaped before she could stop it. She covered her mouth, shoulders shaking. No one in the room knew that she had just received a medical report 3 days earlier. No one knew that she had begged, quietly, secretly, for some kind of sign, something that would tell her she wasn't alone. But the way she pressed her hands against her chest told its own story. Evan didn't move toward her. He didn't try to comfort her the way adults might. He simply watched her with a softness that felt older than him, like he was carrying comfort rather than trying to manufacture it. "He said he's closer than you think," Evan added. "He said that part was important." The air around them thickened with quiet. People nearby pretended not to listen, but their breathing shifted, their posture changed, hearts leaning in without bodies moving closer. Claire nodded through tears, whispering a thank you she could barely say out loud. She walked away unsteadily, one hand gripping the back of each pew as she passed, like someone relearning how to walk. Evan's mother finally exhaled. In the car on the way home, silence wrapped itself around the family. The windshield framed an overcast sky, Salem's narrow streets sliding by in blurred shades of grey and brown. Little remained of the morning sunlight. But in the back seat, Evan sat with his hands folded loosely in his lap, gazing out the window as if still seeing something no one else could see. His father broke first. "Evan," he said slowly, eyes fixed on the road, "when you said you saw him, what did you mean exactly?" Evan didn't answer right away. He watched the trees pass, bare branches tracing delicate lines against the sky. "He was in the light," the boy said, "not like a picture. More like you just know it's him, even if you don't see everything." His mother turned slightly in her seat. "What did he say, sweetheart? All of it?" Evan drew in a breath, as if gathering the memory carefully. "He said the time is almost gone," he repeated softly. "But he also said, 'Tell them I'm still here.'" Those last words slipped into the car, with a warmth that didn't match the outside air. The heater hummed quietly, but what they felt wasn't just temperature. It was something gentler, a hush that seemed to ease into their bones. "Did you feel scared?" his mother asked. Evan shook his head. "It felt heavy," he said, searching for a word big enough. "But not bad. Like when Dad puts his hand on my back so I don't fall. It felt like that. Heavy, but safe." His father's grip tightened on the steering wheel. A memory flashed through his mind, nights awake, worry gnawing at him about bills, about the house, about the slow drifting of his own faith into routine. How many times had he sung the same songs with a distant heart? How many times had he stood in that same church without really looking up? "Tell them I'm still here." The phrase echoed in him, not as threat, but as invitation. A quiet pull back to something he had once known deeply and then let fade under responsibility and noise. At home, the house greeted them with its familiar creaks and soft clutter, shoes by the door, a jacket half folded on a chair, the faint smell of coffee lingering from earlier that morning. Yet even here, the atmosphere felt changed, touched by whatever had followed them from the church. They sat at the kitchen table, 3 chairs, 1 small glass of milk, 2 mugs of coffee gone lukewarm. The conversation that waited between them felt both fragile and unavoidable. "Evan," his mother said gently, "if he talks to you again, will you tell us?" Evan looked at her, then at his father, then at the table. He nodded. "He said too?" the boy replied simply. "He said it was important that I don't keep it to myself." His parents exchanged a glance. The weight of those words settled deeply, not as pressure, but as responsibility. Not just for Evan, but for them. The boy swung his legs under the chair, eyes drifting toward the window again. "He's not mad," Evan added quietly, almost to himself. "Everyone thinks he's mad, but he was sad and kind." He searched for another word, brow furrowing. He wanted them to know they still have time, some of them. The phrase "some of them" hung there like an unfinished sentence. Outside, the day dimmed a little more. Inside, comfort and urgency sat side by side at the table, invisible but undeniable, like two unseen hands resting gently on the same worn wood. Night settled over Salem with a softness that felt almost deliberate. The miller's house, normally filled with the easy sounds of evening, running bathwater, the squeak of Evan's bedroom door, distant laughter from the TV, seemed quieter than usual. Not empty, just attentive, as if the walls themselves were listening. Evan's parents tucked him into bed earlier than normal, unsure if rest would help or silence would make things worse. The bedside lamp glowed warm against the posters on his wall. Dinosaurs, rockets, a drawing he'd made of the church with uneven lines, and a sun twice the size of the building. His mother brushed his hair back. His father stood in the doorway, arms crossed, trying to read his son's face. "Do you feel tired?" his mother asked gently. "A little," Evan whispered. "But not sleepy tired. It's more like heart-tired." The words didn't fit a 6-year-old, yet they fell from his mouth with the innocence of one. His mother leaned forward, kissing his forehead. "We're right here, sweetheart. Always." Evan nodded, but his eyes drifted upward, not to the ceiling itself, but just above it, as though sensing something resting beyond the wood and plaster. "He said some people don't know he's close," Evan added softly. "That makes him sad." His father stepped forward. "Close? How?" Evan looked at him, tiny brows tightening as he searched carefully for the right description. "Like, if you put your hand on someone's shoulder but they don't feel it because they're thinking too loud." A hush filled the room, not heavy, not frightening, just tender, like the kind of silence that follows truth. They turned off the lamp and left the door slightly open, letting the hallway's faint glow spill across the carpet. Evan curled into his blankets. His breathing steadied, and for a moment everything felt normal again. But downstairs, normal didn't return. The parents sat in the living room, coffee untouched, the quiet between them filled with more questions than words. A single lamp lit the space, casting soft shadows across the family photos on the wall. Evan learning to ride a bike. Evan holding a sparkler at 4th of July. Evan dressed as a shepherd in last year's Christmas play. All ordinary moments, all suddenly framed by something extraordinary. His mother ran her fingers over the rim of her mug. "He's never said anything like that before," she whispered. "I know." "Do you believe him?" His father hesitated, not because he doubted the boy, but because he doubted himself. "I believe he believes it," he said, "and I believe something happened in that church today. Something real." The house creaked softly, settling into the cool of the night. Through the window, the streetlights glowed against thin layers of fog creeping across the sidewalks. His mother closed her eyes. When he said, "The time is almost gone," she hesitated. "What did you feel?" His father stared into the distance, jaw tightening. "Like I haven't been paying attention," he admitted. "Like I've been moving through life with my eyes half open. Like I forgot God was close too." His voice cracked on the last word, surprising even him. His wife reached for his hand. The moment was quiet, raw, honest. No pretense, no easy answers. Just two parents suddenly aware of the thin veil between the ordinary and the holy. A soft thud upstairs made them both lift their heads. Not loud, just a shift, maybe Evan turning in bed. Yet something about the timing made them stand without speaking. They climbed the stairs together, each step measured, hearts beating faster, though nothing fearful waited for them. They paused at Evan's doorway, listening. The room glowed faintly, not from the hallway light, not from a lamp, but from something gentler, something like the pale shimmer that sits on snow under a full moon. Evan sat upright in bed, eyes open, expression calm. His mother rushed in. "Evan, you okay?" The boy nodded slowly, gaze steady on the corner of the room, where nothing visible stood. "He's not here," Evan said softly. "But the feeling is." His father swallowed. "What feeling?" Evan laid a hand over his small chest. "Comfort," he whispered, "like someone wants everyone to know they don't have to be scared." The parents exchanged a look, one of awe, confusion, and a strange peace threading itself through the fear. Evan blinked, seemed to listen inwardly, then added, "He said people forget he's gentle." Those words hit deeper than any warning, deeper than any prophecy. Evan leaned back against his pillow. "That's all for now," he said simply, like a child announcing he'd finished his homework. His mother tucked the blanket around him again. His father brushed his hair in silence. Both lingered longer than usual before stepping away. When they finally returned to the hallway, the mother whispered, "What if this is only the beginning?" Her husband didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer lived in the quiet, in the wait, in the comfort, and in the unmistakable sense that something had followed them home. Something kind, something urgent, something waiting for its next moment to speak. Word traveled through Salem more quietly than gossip, but more persistently than rumor. By the middle of the week, several families who had been in the service couldn't shake the memory of the small boy who stopped singing, the beam of stubborn light, and the sentence that left the room weightless and heavy at the same time. "He said the time is almost gone. Did you see the way he looked up? The light didn't move. I was watching." Nobody said the word miracle. Nobody dared to call it hysteria. They just wondered. On Wednesday afternoon, the pastor parked his car in front of the miller's house. He sat there for a moment, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, feeling the gravity of what he was about to do. He had visited families before, after surgeries, after funerals, after financial collapse. He knew how to bring scripture, how to bring comfort. But this time was different. This time he was visiting the family whose 6-year-old had finished his sermon before he even started it. He knocked. Evan's mother opened the door, eyes tired but kind. "Pastor," she said softly, stepping aside, "we thought you might come." The living room was simple, warm, cushions slightly worn, children's books on the coffee table, a faint scent of laundry detergent in the air. Evan's drawings were taped along one wall, stick figures, suns, a house, a lopsided dog. Evan himself sat on the floor with building blocks, constructing a tower that leaned in quiet defiance of gravity. "Hi, Evan," the pastor greeted, lowering himself into a chair. The boy smiled politely, returning a shy "hi" before focusing back on his tower. They spoke first without mentioning the moment in church. The pastor asked about school, about how Evan liked his teacher, about his favorite song from the worship team. The boy answered with the simple honesty of childhood. Then the conversation shifted. "Evan," the pastor said gently, "can I ask you something about Sunday?" The tower building slowed. Evan placed one last block carefully, then turned, legs folded underneath him. "Okay," he said. The pastor clasped his hands together, not in performance, but in need. "When you said you saw him," he continued, "what did that look like to you?" Evan thought for a moment, gaze drifting upward, not to some glorious vision, but to find the right words. "It wasn't like a picture in a book," he said. "It was more like light that had a person inside. You don't see all the pieces, you just know who it is." The pastor's throat tightened. "And the words, about time." Evan's face grew softer, not fearful, just serious. "He said some people think they have a lot of time to come close," the boy explained. "But they don't. He said some of them are tired and think he's far away. But he's not. He said that part was very important. The pastor swallowed hard, his own private fears rising. The sermons he hadn't preached because they felt too sharp, the moments he had chosen comfort over conviction. Yet here, sitting on a carpet next to scattered blocks, the message he'd avoided had been delivered by a child. Evan looked at him with the unguarded clarity that made adults uncomfortable. He said, "You're scared too," the boy added quietly, "but you don't have to be." The sentence struck like a gentle blow, soft, undeniable, exactly aimed. "I'm scared," the pastor repeated, voice nearly a whisper. Evan nodded. "You're scared to tell them everything," he said, "because you don't want them to leave. But he said he's the one who keeps them, not you." The room stilled. Evan's parents didn't breathe. The pastor didn't move. The lamp on the side table cast a halo of warm light, holding them all inside its circle. There was no drama in Evan's tone, no odd trance, no rehearsed speech, just a boy recounting what he had heard as plainly as if he were describing recess. A long silence passed, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with something unseen settling into place. "I don't want to scare anybody," the pastor admitted, his own voice shaking. Evan tilted his head. "But he doesn't want them to be alone," the boy said, "and they already are, if no one tells them." Those words carried the heart of the message, wrapped in comfort and urgency at the same time. Jesus wasn't, in Evan's retelling, standing in the light with anger. He was standing there with concern, with sadness, with the insistence of someone who didn't want anyone left out. The pastor closed his eyes. He hadn't come for this, but he needed it. When he finally opened them, there was a new steadiness there, fragile but real. "Evan," he said gently, "did he say anything else about me?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. He said, "Tell him I'm with him when he feels most alone. He thinks I'm disappointed. I'm not." Tears filled the pastor's eyes before he could stop them. Not dramatic, not loud, just quiet streams of relief running down a face that had been holding too much for too long. Evan's mother looked away, her own eyes blurred. The comfort in the room was unmistakable. Not comfort that excuses, not comfort that erases responsibility, but comfort that reminds a weary heart it is seen and still loved. After the pastor left, the house didn't feel heavier. It felt held. Evan returned to his blocks. His parents watched him with a tenderness mixed with wonder, as if he were both their child and the bearer of a message they had been waiting their whole lives to hear, without knowing it. "Do you feel tired now?" his mother asked later, as he sat at the table with a peanut butter sandwich. "A little less," he said, chewing thoughtfully. "It's easier when I say it out loud. He wanted you to know too." "Know what?" Evan shrugged softly. "That he's here," he answered, "even when you're just washing dishes. He said you always think you're bothering him when you talk. You're not." Her hand froze around the dish towel. A memory surfaced. Late nights at the sink, whispered prayers under her breath, followed by a quiet apology to God for talking too much. She had never told anyone that. Comfort wrapped around her like a warm blanket, invisible but undeniable. If a 6-year-old in Salem was truly carrying the echo of a voice from another world, it wasn't a voice roaring from the clouds. It was one leaning close, whispering into ordinary moments. "I'm still here. I see you. You're not alone. But don't waste the time you have." And that combination, comfort and urgency, tenderness and warning, love and insistence, began to move beyond their home, into conversations, into hearts, into the quiet corners of a town that suddenly felt much less ordinary than it had a week before. By Sunday, the church felt different. People arrived earlier than usual, not out of excitement but out of quiet need. They came with the soft caution of those stepping into a place where something sacred had brushed against their lives and left a mark. Some carried notebooks. Some carried questions. Some carried burdens they had hidden for years. But all of them carried an unspoken expectation. The pastor's sermon notes sat untouched on his desk. He had written and rewritten them 3 times, but each version felt too small, too neat, too afraid. So he left the papers beside his Bible and walked up to the pulpit empty-handed, feeling the strange steadiness that had settled over him since his visit to the miller's house. Evan sat near the front, swinging his legs gently, unaware of the eyes drifting toward him with a mixture of reverence and curiosity. His parents sat on either side, their hands resting near him, not out of fear of what he might say, but out of awe at what he already had. When the service began, the choir's voices rose with a trembling sincerity, as though each singer was reaching upward, hoping to touch whatever had touched Evan. The final note held longer than usual, just a little, just enough to feel like a prayer, rather than a performance. The pastor cleared his throat and spoke. "I don't have a sermon today," he said. His voice was steady but stripped of every layer of careful polish. "I only have honesty." The congregation leaned in. "For a long time," he continued, "I've been preaching from a place of caution. Not courage, not conviction, caution. I worried more about being careful than being faithful." He looked down for a moment, breath shaking. "And last Sunday, God used the smallest person in this room to remind me of something I forgot." Evan's feet stopped swinging. "He reminded me that he's still here," the pastor said softly. "Closer than we think." A rustle moved through the room, people shifting, inhaling, listening with their whole bodies. "And he reminded me," the pastor added, "that some of us are running out of time to come close to him, not because he's angry, because he's been waiting so long, and some of us haven't turned toward him in years." The words felt both heavy and gentle, the kind that settle into the soul rather than press onto it. Something about the room changed then, something almost imperceptible. A stillness, yes, but also a warmth, like someone had quietly stepped inside and taken their place among them. Evan lifted his head. The pastor continued, unaware. "I don't know everything that happened last week," he admitted, "but I know this. God is calling us, softly, kindly, urgently, and we need to listen." The sanctuary felt like a held breath, and then Evan stood, not abruptly, not dramatically, just stood. His mother touched his arm but didn't stop him. His father felt the same instinctive release, a sense that whatever was about to happen wasn't theirs to interfere with. Evan looked at the pastor first, then at the congregation. His voice, when it rose, carried no weight of performance. It simply existed, clear and impossibly pure. "He said some people here think he's disappointed in them," Evan whispered. "He's not." A woman in the 3rd row bowed her head. A man near the aisle clutched his chest. Evan continued, eyes softening as if listening inwardly. "He said some people stop talking to him because they think he got tired of listening, but he didn't. He said he never gets tired of listening." A few people covered their mouths. Someone began to cry quietly. Evan looked toward the back of the room, eyes settling on a man sitting alone, someone no one expected to be noticed. "He said you didn't ruin everything," Evan said, voice barely above breath. "You just forgot you were loved." The man's shoulders collapsed. He leaned forward, hands shaking, face buried in them, not from fear, from a relief so deep it broke him open. The pastor stepped down from the pulpit without thinking, standing beside Evan, not towering over him but sharing the space. "Evan," he said gently, "is there anything else?" The boy blinked slowly. "He said this part is important," Evan whispered. "He said, I'm still here. I never left. But don't wait." When the final sentence hovered, weightless and weighty at the same time, comfort wrapped in urgency, love wrapped in warning. Then Evan sat down, breathing a little heavier, as though carrying light was, in its own way, exhausting. No one moved, no one spoke. The air felt thick with presence, gentle, holy, indescribable. People began to pray without being asked. Some knelt, some whispered, some simply closed their eyes and let tears fall silently. Evan leaned against his mother's side. He looked tired, but not afraid. "It's okay," he murmured. He said, "It's okay." His mother kissed the top of his head. His father closed his eyes, gratitude softening the lines on his face. The pastor returned to the pulpit, but only to whisper, "Let him speak. Let him comfort you." And for the first time in years, the church wasn't guided by a sermon. It was guided by a presence that made its home in silence, the kind of silence that feels like a hand on your back, steadying you, calling you, reminding you. You are not alone. You still have time. In the days that followed, Salem felt as if someone had turned the volume down on everything loud and turned the light up on everything quiet. It wasn't in the headlines. There were no news vans, no reporters. What changed did so in kitchens and cars, in late-night walks and whispered prayers. The shift was subtle but deep, like a tide rolling in so gently you only notice when the shoreline is no longer where you left it. In the Miller house, life continued in all its ordinary details. Lunch boxes still needed packing. Homework still came home crumpled at the bottom of Evan's backpack. The washing machine still rattled when it spun too fast. Yet under all of it, something new pulsed, an awareness that every small moment sat inside a presence that wasn't distant anymore. One evening, Evan sat at the dining table with crayons scattered around him. He wasn't drawing superheroes or spaceships this time. He was drawing people, little figures with lines of light above their heads, some standing still, others walking away. His mother watched from the kitchen sink, hands in warm water, eyes drifting repeatedly toward him. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" she asked. "People," he answered simply. She dried her hands and came closer, studying the paper. "Why does this one have light on him?" she asked, pointing. "Because he turned around," Evan said. "He heard him." Her finger moved to another figure, one walking in the opposite direction. "And this one?" Evan hesitated, his crayon hovering in the air. "He heard him too," the boy said softly, but he pretended he didn't. The answer pierced more deeply than accusation. It carried the ache of someone watching people walk past an open door. His mother swallowed. "Does that make him angry?" she asked quietly. Evan shook his head. "It makes him sad," he said, "but he doesn't stop calling." The words were not heavy with doom. They were soaked with longing, the longing of a heart that wants to be recognized, welcomed, not feared. Later that week, Claire, the woman with the medical report, asked to visit. She sat on the miller's couch with an envelope in her hands, fingers trembling over the edge. Her eyes shone, not with panic this time, but with something softer. "They repeated the tests," she said, voice breaking. "The doctor said he can't explain it. The shadows on the scan are gone." Evan's parents exchanged a stunned glance. Claire laughed through her tears, pressing the envelope to her chest. "I don't know if it was healing," she whispered, "or a mistake on the first scan. But I know this. When your son said those words, something in me let go of a fear I'd been carrying alone. And whether my time is long or short, I don't feel alone anymore." Her words carried the heart of what was happening all over town. Some people experienced clear changes, test results, reconciled relationships, addictions loosening their grip. Others didn't see anything dramatic shift on the outside, but inside, fears began to soften. Walls began to crack. Hearts that had gone quiet started whispering again. "I started talking to him in the car," a man told the pastor after service, eyes red. "Just in the car. I always thought it was silly, but now I can't stop." A woman confessed, I thought he was sick of hearing me say the same thing. I stopped praying years ago, but when the boy said he never gets tired of listening, something broke in me. Comfort moved through Salem like a quiet river, not the kind that lulls people to sleep, but the kind that soaks into dry ground and makes it possible for seeds long buried to finally grow. For Evan, the days felt full. Sometimes he would pause mid-play, face growing still, as though a sentence floated through him. Sometimes he would pass by someone at the grocery store and feel that strange heaviness again, the mix of urgency and tenderness pressing against his small chest. Once, standing in line with his mother, he tugged gently on her sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, glancing at the woman in front of them, shoulders slumped under a winter coat. He said she thinks nobody sees her. But he does. His mother hesitated. "Should we tell her?" she asked. Evan shook his head. "Not this time," he said. "He just wanted me to pray." And so, in a grocery store line under fluorescent lights, a 6-year-old bowed his head for a brief moment, offering a silent invitation to a God he had seen in light, but now felt in the quiet. At night, the weight of it sometimes settled heavy on him. He would lie in bed, eyes open, fingers curled in the blanket. His father began a new routine. Every evening he sat on the edge of Evan's bed and asked one simple question: "Do you feel heavy or light tonight?" Some nights, Evan smiled. "Light," he'd say, and drift off easily. Other nights, his eyes shimmered. "Kind of heavy," he'd admit. On those nights, his father didn't try to give answers. He didn't lecture or explain. He simply placed a hand on his son's back, the way Evan had described that heavenly weight, and whispered, "Jesus, whatever you shared with him today, carry it with him. Let him be a child first, a messenger second." The room would grow still. The heaviness didn't always leave instantly, but it settled differently, as if rearranged by a stronger hand. Sometimes Evan would whisper back, "He said thank you." "For what?" his father would ask. "For letting him be close," Evan would answer, eyes already drooping. Those words dug deep into his father's heart. For years, he had treated God like a distant appointment, something to attend to manage, to fit into a schedule. Now he found himself realizing God had only ever wanted to be close, not to crush, not to condemn, to comfort, to call, gently but urgently. And as that realization deepened in their home, in their church, in their town, one question began to rest quietly on the horizon of every heart. If he is this close, what will we do with the time we still have? The answer would not come in a single moment, or a single service, or even through a single child, but it had begun. And heaven, it seemed, was not finished speaking. By the next Sunday, the church was full long before the first bell rang. Some came for answers, some came for peace. Some came because something in their chest had begun to ache in a way they hadn't felt in years, an ache that whispered, "Come closer." But no one came to see a spectacle, not after what happened, not after the quiet weight that had settled on Salem like a soft mantle. Evan sat with his parents in the same pew as before. His feet didn't touch the floor. His hands rested calmly in his lap. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't excited. He simply was. Small, steady, attentive to a presence no one else could see but everyone could feel. When the choir sang the opening hymn, something unusual happened. The voices didn't rise loud. They didn't carry with the force of practiced harmony. They wavered, fragile, trembling, sincere. Halfway through the song, several singers began to cry. Not from sorrow, not from fear, from something softer, something like being held after a long time of standing alone. The pastor stepped up to the pulpit, but the moment he laid his hands on the wood, he froze, not in fear, but in awe. The air shifted. It wasn't a dramatic change, no wind, no sound, no visible sign, but every person in the room felt it at the same time, a sense of closeness so intense it tightened the throat and softened the knees. Several people bowed their heads instinctively. A few whispered prayers they hadn't prayed in decades. Evan looked up. It wasn't the same way as last time, not the sudden stillness, not the beam of light. This time his expression didn't change at all. He simply breathed in, then out, like someone listening to a voice resting gently beside him. His mother felt the shift in him immediately. His father straightened. The pastor's hands trembled. The building felt alive. A holy hush settled, a silence that wasn't empty but full, almost warm, like a blanket laid over every heart in the room. Evan stood, softly, without hurry, as though rising in response to something whispered only to him. He stepped into the aisle, his small shoes tapping lightly on the old wood. No one moved to stop him. The sound was delicate, each footstep echoing deeper than it should. The pastor stepped down, but he didn't approach Evan. He simply waited, breath held, eyes steady, heart braced as if standing before something sacred. Evan turned to the congregation. His eyes were not haunted, not wild, not distant. They were gentle, filled with an innocence untouched by fear. And then he spoke, not loudly, not theatrically, just enough to be heard. He said some hearts woke up this week. A woman in the back began to cry. He said some hearts are still hurting, but he's closer than the hurting. A quiet gasp rose from the right side of the sanctuary. Evan's voice softened even further, the words falling like warm rain on a parched field. He said you don't have to try so hard to be perfect. He knows you're tired. A man near the aisle covered his face. He said you think you don't deserve him anymore. Evan paused. But he said, you do, because you're his. The room broke, not in chaos, not in hysteria, but in surrender, quiet, reverent, overwhelming surrender. People knelt without being told, hands clasped or open, tears slipping down faces without shame. Some whispered apologies, others whispered thank yous, some just whispered his name for the first time in years. Evan took a small breath, as though the message settling inside him had weight. Then he spoke the final line, the line that belonged not to comfort alone, but to love sharpened by urgency. He said, I'm here right now, but don't wait. Silence fell, not empty, not cold, but sacred. A silence that wrapped itself around the room like arms. Evan blinked slowly, then exhaled, a deep, relieved breath, like someone laying down a burden he was never meant to carry forever. His mother rushed forward, kneeling and pulling him gently into her arms. His small hands curled around her, his face resting against her shoulder. He looked tired, truly tired, the way someone feels after speaking truth too big for their size. His father knelt beside them, one hand on Evan's back, the other covering his own trembling mouth. The pastor stood a few feet away, tears streaming freely. He whispered, barely audible, Lord, we hear you. No one sang the closing hymn. No one asked for announcements. No one checked their watches. People stayed. Some knelt, some sat in stillness, some reached for the hands of strangers beside them. A sense of presence lingered, gentle, insistent, unexplainable. And Evan slowly lifted his head from his mother's shoulder. He looked at the corner of the sanctuary where the light from a stained glass window gathered softly on the floor. He smiled, not because he saw someone standing there, not because of a vision or a miracle. He smiled because of something simpler, something quieter, something deeper, because the feeling was still there, because he was still there. And as the people of Salem sat in that holy silence, breathing, weeping, listening, one truth settled quietly over them. The message wasn't finished, the time wasn't over, and the one who called them had never left.